guys. So I threw around the idea of this video for, I don't know, a couple weeks or not. Getting back and forth, just kind of, should I do it? How should I do it? So I had a few cups of coffee this morning, so I'm riding high on the caffeine. So I thought, yeah, what the heck? Let's just hit the record button and see how it goes. So pretty much the whole deal of this video is to save money on flight training. So straight up front, full disclaimer, I'm not a CFI. I put that in the disclaimer already. And I'm not an expert when it comes to this type of stuff. All I do is I try to give you guys information so you can kind of make the best choices and you don't fall in the same pit holes that I did. So I've had a little bit of training, and I'm a pilot, and hopefully I can share some information to help you guys save a little bit, maybe even a lot in this type of stuff. So flight training is probably the most costly thing that you can do out of anything that's dealing with aviation. Sometimes the amount of training and cost associated to training will far exceed the actual aircraft costs that you're probably going to purchase. So without further ado, let's get into it. And like I said, basically I'm just going to kind of tell you what's going on. So for a private pilot, there's a lot of different classifications or certificates that you can get. This is kind of the one I'm concentrating on now today for you guys. So for private pilot training, there's a few things that you need. You need a medical third class certificate, so you just go basically to a certified examiner by the FAA. They say they wave their little magic wand and say that this examiner is certified to make sure that you have your third class medical certificate so you can become a student pilot. Or you can do the basic med, which is pretty cool. The basic med legislation got passed last year, 2016, if you're watching this a little later, which said that you don't need the class 3. So on your own accord, go out there, do your research on what is what you need for that. If a class 3 is more kind of what you are looking for, or if you just want to fly under the basic med certificate there. You need to pass the FAA written exam. There is a written exam to become a private pilot. If I remember correctly, it's somewhere around 25 questions where you go into a certified exam station. That could just be your local airport. I know I just took mine right up the street. I'll get into the studying bit, but basically you study aeronautical knowledge and a few key terms, concepts, and ideas that are surrounding the private pilot certificate. You go up there, you're really nervous, you go ahead and you pass that exam, and you're good to go to become a student pilot. Now, you can take the FAA written exam whenever you like. However, you cannot get your private pilot license before you take the written exam, because when you get into the room with the FAA examiner to do your practical and your flight stuff, you will review the questions that you missed over the FAA written exam. Now, this is just to give you an idea of how to save money, so I'm probably going to shoot out another video or blog post or something to that effect where I actually go through what you need to get your private license and kind of pointers and tips. But next to a bullet point, you do, like I said, need to go through and get your check ride. That's where an FAA examiner, you set up time with him to actually jump in the plane and to talk about on the ground what you guys need to do, what you will be doing, and again, you need to cover the written exam portion. So hold short for me on the next video. Hopefully that will go over a little bit more in detail what you need to be a private pilot, but this is just kind of the basics and some of the points where you can actually save money, so I'm going to go into that now. So here come the points. Again, not too rehearsed. This is just you, me, and your computer, kind of a conversation here and some points that I need to pull out. If you have some more that you want to add, if you've already gone through this, if you're already a pilot, or you've already jumped into a pothole, just add them in the comments below. It'll help everybody. Again, I'm not perfect at this, so if you think of something, just let us know. So, first point, and it's probably one of the more important ones. This isn't, of course, listed in importance, but don't start your training. Don't jump into this until you know the cost and have a plan to pay. It sounds pretty straightforward, but a lot of people get all excited. They get the little discovery flight, right? They jump in a plane. They start with their first CFII because that's just the guy on field, right? And they're just like, my gosh, this is awesome. So make sure that you have a plan, right? Like this is an investment into yourself, and it shouldn't be taken lightly. So just kind of sit down, get an idea of how much this is actually going to cost you in the area that you're going to take your training, how long you plan on drawing this out before you actually get your certificate, and get an idea, right? So plan. If you plan things out, the actual cost will be reduced dramatically. I can't emphasize that enough. So plan, plan, plan. I'm not a planner, but with this particular thing, just like you would do in like college or other things that are significant costs, the more you plan, the more money you'll save. When you find a CFII, work with them to let you know what kind of goals. And goals is basically with your first certificate, especially in this case, private pilot. You want to make sure that they know what's going on. When I first started off back in 2001, my very first CFII, right? I didn't have a plan. I just threw myself into it, hoped for the best, and that did not work. I ended up spending literally thousands of dollars, and it did not work out well. So when you make your plan, go over it with your CFII. Is this going to take a few months for you to accomplish? Do you have a year plan? Or in my case, is work and other responsibilities going to get in the way? So you need this. You need to go through the training pretty rigorously. With the second time around there with the new CFII, I wrote an email to them and I said, "Hey, I'm not thinking about doing this training for another year. So I need to save up because I want to get my certificate in 2 weeks." And I had a plan. I talked with the CFII. I made sure I laid out my responsibilities, his responsibilities, and the applicability. Can I do this? And yeah, it can be done in 2 or 3 weeks if you lay it out and you know what's going on and he knows what's going on and you just go for it. That won't be the case for everybody, but hey, work through your training quickly. And I don't mean this in the sense of, hey, just get through your stuff quickly, don't learn that type of stuff. What I'm saying is that if you're one of those students that only has time to do this once a week, know that you're going to be losing a lot of money, a ton of money, right? Because what happens is if you train every Saturday for every week until you get your pilot's license, that time is going to be extremely long, right? And the reason that is because you're going to have to relearn everything that you forgot over that week. Although you think that you didn't forget anything throughout the week, even if you study those other 6 days, you're going to forget some of that information, almost up to half of that information. So the more quick that you can work through your progress as becoming a pilot, the better off you are and the more money that you're going to save. This also comes into play with a few other things that I'll get in, but make sure you have the plan, you work through your CFI, and you stick to that schedule, and you are adamant about working through your program more quickly. I'll be honest with you, I didn't have the money to do everything, so that's why I literally waited a year before I started cracking down on my training. And that saved a ton of money. Shop arounds. Super, super important, right? I know that I have an airport literally 5 minutes away from me. It's where I base my plane. It's a great airport. They have super facilities. Can't say more things about it. That's just more positive. However, their training program is super expensive. they train in high performance aircraft, the SR-22s, right? They're great aircraft. I have personal opinions about them, but for students, that is. However, the main fact is that if I were to do my training at that location, it would literally cost double, right, for the aircraft rental itself. So the CFIIs up there are slightly more expensive. The aircraft is exorbitantly more expensive. Upon shopping around, I found an airport that was smaller, didn't have quite the same facilities, but still kind of had the hometown feel, right? But the CFII cost and the aircraft especially cost. The aircraft I found actually was able to be taught in a light sport aircraft, which again, I'm sure people have, you know, their own pluses and minuses to throw to them. But the point is to make sure that you just don't go to one airport, to one flight school, because the cost associated to those vary wildly. So make sure you take the time to shop around. It will save you a ton of money, trust me. Pass your FAA written exam prior to starting your flight training. You want to get that out of the way because you don't want that back in your head, because it does a few things, right? Number one, once you take it, you're done, right? You don't have to worry about studying for that written exam and taking time to do that written exam while you're doing your actual flight training with your CFII, right? So you get that out of the way. It's not that you're doing it and forgetting your information. You're building on that information when you're flying. So as a personal prerequisite, you should go ahead and take that FAA exam. Again, it'll save you money because you're not having to worry about it. You're not having to take time off of your training to actually take the written exam, and it accelerates your learning when you're actually with your CFII or I in the aircraft, because when you've taken that FAA exam, you're applying that knowledge to your flying. So when you're up and you're doing I'm thinking of my IFR training, but when you're doing a hold, or when you're doing an approach, or when you're in a pattern, or when you're talking to ATC or something to that effect, you're going to reflect back on that FAA, especially the ones that you got wrong, right? And you're going to say, hey, you know, I got this wrong on the test, and I kind of see what's going on now, and you're filling in those blanks. So when you have that conversation, ultimately, when you get to that point when you're with that FAA examiner, you can reflect and say, you know what, I got this question wrong. And if the FAA examiner asks you, well, do you know why you got that question wrong? You can securely say, yeah, I know exactly why I got this question wrong. Now, of course, you want to hold off on elaborating too much on your answers, because you want that FAA examiner to be the one leading that conversation. You don't want to get any potholes, but it will definitely help you through your process. So pass your FAA written exam prior to starting your flight training, and you need to do an FAA written exam before any type of certification. I'm trying to think if there's any. I really can't think if there's any certifications, and by all means throw them in the comments below. But in all levels of flight training, take that thing. Take it before you start your flight training. So some sticky notes, to be honest with you, just kind of change things up a bit. Few things to stay busy and to make sure that you save a ton of money, right? Your caption here. Study, right? Study, study, study. When you're not training and you're at the house, study. Biggest thing is just not rely on your CFII. He's there to help you out, and you're there to make sure that you learn and that you take that information home and you study it, you ponder about it, you write it down, you have questions for him in the next morning or the next time you meet with them. So make sure you don't slack off. Slacking is money. So you want to make sure to go home and study. Buy a simulator. God, this makes so much sense, right? And the reason is that you're flying in the air. You've got limited time, right? Every hour clicking off is just costing you money. So the cheapest way to practice is not be in that plane is to come home and to actually buy a simulator and make sure that you go through and you apply that to the simulator, apply that information. What helped me out with VOR and pilotage, right, is to come home and actually fiddle around with the simulator. There's a bunch of good simulators out there, and all of them have pretty good application of the VORs, especially GPS tracking, that type of information or stuff. So when you get home, you can fiddle around and you don't have to worry about crashing, right? Because that's a pretty big expense if you crash an airplane. So at home, you're able to play around with that stuff and not have to worry about the repercussions of crashing your aircraft. So buy a simulator. It's totally worth it. I think most simulators are around $60. You can go on the computer, you can fiddle around with it. You guys get the point, right? Off the shelf versus used. So a lot of the stuff that you need as a student pilot, especially as a private pilot, can be bought used. I'll be honest with you. Everybody likes new and shiny stuff, but used headsets, used flight computers, both the electrical and the manual flight computers, books, all that type of stuff. You can find on most of the time Craigslist, eBay, all the other type of outlets, right? And that's a major expense that you can actually save quite a bit on. There are a lot of pilots out there, wannabe pilots or pilots that wanted to do their training and just got fed up. They just couldn't do it because they didn't develop a plan there, that have all of their stuff that they bought brand new sitting on Craigslist at like half off, maybe even not even that. And if you develop a plan, you're going to be going through this just fine. If you do the little step of passing your written exam and all that type of jazz, you'll be just fine. However, you want to make sure to take advantage of those who are not able to, and you buy their stuff. You don't need a fancy headset. I would really strongly caution against a fancy headset. Get the cheapest headset you can, right? Even the cheapest ones out there are good, right? They work. And even a book, if it's a year old or something to that effect, especially with private information, the information's not going to change, right? What's the 4 components? The VOR stuff. VOR's not going to change. VOR stuff's been around forever. GPS, all that information, Bernoulli's, you get the whole point, right? The core information for private pilot study is not going to change. There are going to be certain things on the FAA exam that are going to change a little bit, the actual questions. However, they rely on the principles that have been in place for years and years, right? So buy used when you can. It'll save you a ton of money. It really will. And it makes no sense to buy new stuff. It's very, very rare that you'll get in a spot where buying some type of new thing will put you in an advantage. So for the most part, I can't think of many things. Buy used. Avoid packages. When you go to a flight school, a way they kind of and they usually have the pilot's best, they're looking out for you in most cases, but avoid the packages where they give you like everything, the little backpack with the stuff already included for a set amount. What I would do is I would make sure that you work with your CFII and you say, hey, what do I need for this particular certification to pass everything, to make sure that I have what I need to pass, right? And nine times out of 10, the CFII will say, John, Sarah, whoever, this is what you need. You need a flight computer. You need to make sure that you have a logbook, so on and so forth. And you don't need anything fancy. You don't need to pay $100 extra to get that cool backpack or, the pilot gear bag or something like that. I use a laptop bag, and I've been flying for, like I said, since 2001, and I haven't had any issues with it. Once you become a pilot, once you start making, the big bucks and whatever you're going to decide to do, then, treat yourself to a bag. But right now, you're a student. You don't need to spend anything extra on these little fancy bells and whistles, right? So sit down, and that should be one of the questions you ask when you're interviewing your CFII is, hey, what do I really need? And then with the package deals, make sure you make sure you buy blocks of time. A lot of times they can save you quite a bit of money if you buy blocks of time if you're renting aircraft. But really, that's the only package you should buy is those blocks of time if you're renting an aircraft. All right, gets more. So I noticed that, man, when I started, I bought all kinds of crap as far as studying materials, right? Like, you needed all of this stuff. And you guys, if you're students, what groups I'm talking about that like to load you up with like these, I don't know, I got like 12 books at one time, right? All the way from weather information to FA passing to general information. I mean, it was ridiculous. All right, so a lot of times you don't even need all that stuff, and I'm being serious. And the pilots out there that are starting to type on there, like, oh man, think about it, guys. You know what I'm talking about. So how can you do it without buying all this junk? Utilize online groups, especially Facebook. There are a lot of Facebook groups out there, especially pilot study groups, that are absolutely amazing, that will help you, and they will give you all that information. And a lot of those people have bought those super expensive books and packages that have been through all of this. I'm on a lot of those groups as well. And we all, as pilots, really like to help each other. I don't know what it is, but we just feel for each other because I guess we've all been through the pain of getting through this. We want to kind of give back. So go online, go on Facebook, join a bunch of these study groups, post your questions. It's the easiest way to get answers. And when you become a pilot, give back to the community. It's how we all succeed. So if you go online, there's a ton of study materials that are absolutely free and updated. It's amazing. You'll go through the FAA exam, right? And you'll remember some of these questions, especially the ones you get wrong, and you'll notice that they're already online. The FAA, to be completely honest with you, can only change these questions around so much, right? So if you go online, there's a ton of materials online that are absolutely free. Join a aviation advocacy group. I'm talking about the the AOPAs, that type of jazz. I'm not promoting one over the other. I'm just saying that most of them have material that are totally free for you that you can go and look up and study, and they've got support, and they're where CFIIs actually are part of. It's amazing, right? So check them out. They're really worth it. Plus the money that you give towards those things provide funding for, well, there we go, aviation advocacy. They're the ones that stand up to you or for you in Congress and all those type of local localities that like to press GAs. We want to make sure that they get the funds so they can help us out. Check your local schools and colleges. That's a big one. A lot of schools just everywhere have aviation classes. You can actually get degrees in some courses, and because you're actually attending a college, even if you do have an actual degree or something to that effect, you can take these courses. They'll have grants, scholarships, financial assistance, money that you can put towards those schools. It's pretty awesome. Just because you're actually enrolled in a college program, it opens up a lot of funding that you wouldn't get as a lonely just student that's taken upon himself to go out to one of these colleges, or I'm sorry, one of these flight schools. With that being said, do a search. It's super easy. Go online and search for whatever certificate you're going for, in this case private pilot, just enter in literally private pilot grants, private pilot scholarships, private pilot financial assistance, and it will pull up a ton. I know the AOPA, and again, not endorsing this is the first one that comes to mind, literally has a whole page full of how pilots can seek financial assistance, scholarships, and grants. There are times and cases where you can get all of your training totally paid for. A lot of times it just goes into writing a simple essay or doing something to that effect. If you take the time to look up for those things, you will save a tremendous amount of money, all the way up to totally free. Think about that. It will blow your mind. If you're in high school, for some reason they really like kids in high school to apply for these grants and scholarships. If you're in high school, you can almost guarantee that you're going to have some type of funds coming your way. It's absolutely amazing. Don't worry if you're older and out of high school, you'll still have an opportunity to apply for these grants and scholarships, but it's amazing. If you take the time to look, it will blow your mind. One of the things that you can actually do to save a ton of money might sound absolutely crazy, but it will work. Buying your own plane, right? It has a lot of benefits. And I know when I tell people that I have my own plane, their eyes just get really wide and they're like, oh my gosh, you must be a bajillionaire. No, not so much. Planes have a very wide range. Now you can go crazy and get, multi-million-dollar jets, but for the most part in general aviation, the costs are pretty reasonable. And for a little starter trainer plane, like a little Cessna 150 or something to that effect, everybody, I go on these plane traders and all these other little resources that have airplanes for sale, and you can get a reasonable plane, right, that you can use throughout your training starting at $15,000, right? Yeah, I know people are going crazy, and I'm sure the comments, but seriously, you can. And you can finance a lot of times those aircraft. Financing for aircraft is really awesome. So if you don't have the money up front, you can actually finance an aircraft, do your training, and decide to sell it if you need to. I mean, if you were in my case and you decide to do your training all in one aircraft, you can theoretically finance an aircraft, pay your one payment, and then sell your aircraft. Think about how much money that you're actually saving. Just let that sink in. So if I bought an aircraft for $15,000 and my payment was, I don't know, let's throw out just a totally random figure, $250. If I did all of my pilot training in 1 month, like I said, it took me about 2.5 weeks to do everything. It cost me $250 to have that plane. That's insane. Even with insurance. Insurance is extremely inexpensive for aircraft just based on the risk associated with aircraft ownership. So, here's a few bullet points. You can fly whenever you want. I know that I had to fight other students for aircraft time, and I really had to plan out when I could fly this plane and when I should fly that plane based on how much it costs, right? So I had one of the better deals, right? I think it only cost $120 wet per hour to rent this aircraft. However, think about that. That cost gets pretty large. When you buy your own plane, if you flew it all month long, you might have to, put some oil into it and do an oil change, but that's nowhere close to the cost of renting an aircraft for 40 some hours, right? You can practice whenever you want, like I said. You don't have to worry about that pesky Hobbs time, right? So I know as a pilot you're trying to figure out, or as a student rather, you're trying to figure out, my gosh, I've spent 3 hours in this plane. This is going to cost, $400 and some odd, almost $500, right? You can easily resell this guy. Planes are always wanted. Even if it takes a few months to sell your plane, you're still just paying the cost of the aircraft and insurance. If you want to put it in a hangar, yeah, you can put it in a hangar, but if you're only doing this short term, you might just want to leave it on the field. And so really the only cost associated is insurance, the aircraft cost, maintenance if you have to do any maintenance, and where you're placing it on the field. So I would suggest getting a piece of paper out and just kind of comparing the costs there. You can spend all the time in the world that you want with it, and that makes a huge difference, right? So one of the alternatives is when you're renting aircraft, while other people have that aircraft, you can either wait or you can use another aircraft, right? And that's good, I guess, to kind of go out and play with another plane. However, a lot of times it's good to just spend time with the aircraft that you're training in. And the reason is you get a good chance of looking over your aircraft, bonding with the aircraft, seeing how things operate and work, just sitting in it and feeling the controls, playing with the radios. I know a lot of times I just sit in the plane and I work the GPS, right? The plane that I currently own, that I have about 300 and some hours in, I sit and I still play with it. I have just a little GPS and I just push the buttons. I go through the menus because when I'm in the air, I want to know what I'm doing. I want to know how those VORs works. Every plane has their own little ticks and their own little oddities that you want to work through on the ground. And a lot of times you won't have that ability when you're renting an aircraft. You just can't sit in the field in somebody else's plane and work through those things. So that will put you at a huge advantage when you're doing the practical exam with that FAA examiner. When you don't have to worry about all of those menus and working through those little ticks and oddities in the air with that examiner, you're going to feel totally refreshed and you won't have to worry about that type of stuff. And like I said, prices are not as bad as you think. They really aren't, especially for an older aircraft that's a little two-seater that you and your CFI will have time to just kind of play around with. They're not bad. Look online. A lot of times local airports will have them posted on their little board or whatnot. So take the time to look through and grab an aircraft. It's totally worth it. So these are the points that I could think of, and hopefully this will help you out tremendously and saving you quite a bit. Through all this, you know what? The cost of training is pretty reasonable. The last little point, and the thing that I just kind of ran across recently as I was looking through my email, is in your free time, a lot of times there is a possibility of winning an aircraft. I know, it's wild, right? But everybody seems to be promoting these raffles and free aircraft, and you have the possibility to just sign up. I know that Sporty's a lot of times, you know, if you order anything, it'll go towards it. All these groups are trying to do pilot training, and you can enter in raffles for, you know, a few bucks or whatnot. Most of the time it's no purchase necessary. Literally you just have to fill out a card and send it in. Hey, you never know. There's always a chance. So that way, if you do the scholarship programs or the grant programs and you throw your name in the hat every once in a while, you might get a free plane and free training. Who knows? But might be worth checking into. So that's all I got. If you guys got any more, especially if you've been through this, just leave it in the comments. Everybody kind of gets ahead by starting discussions on how to help each other. So I know this video was probably longer than any of my other videos, but this is the ones that really matter, especially in pilot training. So have a good one and stay safe up there, and catch you next time.